Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream on the BEDAN Society of Young Astronomers Facebook page. I would like to take the time to thank each and every one of you for joining us on this stream. For those of you who are anticipating the Mars rover project and several other projects on Mars, that would be our next topic for the next live stream, together with our next speaker, Sir Gubaya, an astrologist from Saudi Arabia. This is a special stream for we are joined together with our brothers and sisters from the BEDAN Society of Young Astronomers from San Beda College, Alabang. Our special guest speaker is Sir Doods Perea, who will be giving a lecture to be followed by our very own space leader, Sir Yuri Gagarin, on the history of the Apollo project. But first, we must invoke the presence of our Lord as we pray the opening prayer. So in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen. We shall now have the singing of our national anthem. So please put your right hand on your left chest as we honor our flag.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, pero sa sinakalan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisigil, sa nagagang tutok sa simoy at sa langit mo pagaw, ay hinatang tula, kawin sa pagkayang minamahal, ang isang ng matawag mo'y tagumpay na nag-iindig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pamay mag-iindig, lumang ang araw ng walhagin pagsinta, mo'y langit sa piling mo. Ang higaya na pagkay mga akin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
So our first speaker will be Sir Doods Perea on our fascination of the moon. Sir Doods.
So, good. One moment. Dahil lang, I am setting up the meetings. Ayan. Good afternoon. I hope those people who are watching, hello right there. To those people who are watching, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. I hope you have a very pleasant afternoon right now. It's very, very hot. I hope that you are prepared for that. So while you're listening to my lecture about our fascination of the moon, I would gladly advise for you to probably get yourselves comfortable, get some refreshments if you can. And now I'm going to give a lecture on about regarding the fascination of mankind regarding the moon. Now, before I begin, I would like you to understand a few things before we begin this. So please go to the next slide. Okay, so now that we're here and discussing about the fascination of the moon, I would just like to give a little bit of emphasis towards what we know about this object that we see in our night sky. So, sa atin, ang alam natin is that it's just there at night. It's the thing that lights up our night sky. Okay. Or at the very least, it's that big white object that is usually contrasted with that one other celestial object known as the sun. So remember, if we observe closely, our modern world views the moon as that. It's a ball, a white ball in the sky, usually in the night sky. That's the complement of the sun, or lack of better term. But if you look a little bit more closer than that, we will see that we have a lot of different references to the moon that we see in our sky. So for one thing, we use it a lot in the language. So right now, as I'm talking about discussing this topic, I can probably think of some different figures of speech, whether it be English or Filipino, that requires us to use the word moon or yung salitang buwan in that connotation. So examples are such as the phrases, you love somebody to the moon and back, which is, I'm sure kapag sinabi mo siya sa isang tao, it's probably very, very meaningful to them, especially if they love the moon. So you also hear some people who would like to motivate you. They'll motivate you to shoot for the moon. And if you miss, you will fall amongst the stars. So you see those types of things. And also, whenever there's a rare event, there's a rare occurrence in the world, something happened in your life, let's say nagkaroon ka ng lucky day, or you got something good in a particular day, you can say that that event might happen once in a blue moon. So there are different types of words and idioms we usually say. We don't usually notice that it has a little bit of sprinkling of that moon. And not only that, next slide, please. Okay, not only that, you'd also notice that even in the arts, many different famous artists, from singers, painters, songwriters, maybe some dancers, some directors, some actors, they have portrayed the moon in many different forms of art. From, let's say, a poem, like I'm seeing there in the presentation, you can see a poem by W.H. What's his name? W.H. Davis, which is a poem about the moon. You can see there a very prominent painting. Granted, the moon is not the very center, is the centerpiece of that picture, but you can see even Van Gogh's Starry Starry Night features the moon in such a spectacular manner that probably inspired him to do so. One of the first earliest films to tell us about our dreams to go to the moon was depicted on the movie over here. I think this is the movie is called A Visit to the Moon, or A Trip to the Moon, if I remember correctly, and it did feature that very very funny, if I may say, caricature of the moon being hit in the eye by a rocket. Of course, sa mga OPM fans dyan, if you are a constant listener of OPM, you probably know one famous song that has the word buwan, or yung salitang buwan in it. And you probably know what the song is. So again, these are just some of the clapbacks we see in the media, in the art forms that we see. So it's pretty obvious. Man is really fascinated with the moon. There's no doubt about that. You can see that even in the endeavors of the artists, also from our endeavors and probably studying this topic at school, we are kind of inspired by the moon. So now, please, next slide. So we now beg the question, how well do we really know our own moon? How fascinated are we on our own moon? If you are already in the live chat, you can pretty much chat there. If you can share to us a recollection of when was the first time you actually thought about the moon as if it was an actual object. Do you really know what the thing in the sky really is? So for my discussion today, humanity's fascination about the moon, I won't be doing a lecture about its data, because that's a thing that you usually learn in school. Instead, I will be sharing with you a little bit about the history. Well, I'll do share some information, some basic information, just so everybody knows we're on the same page, knowing what the moon is. But also, I'll be sharing to you the scientific journey on how people were very curious and very inquisitive when it comes to knowing this celestial object that we see. Next, please. Hey, next. So what do we know about the moon? Okay, so first things first, I'll do a textbook definition for the moon. And if you haven't noticed, as far as we're concerned right now, you probably see that there are, I have capitalized the M in the word moon, because technically speaking, that's the name of our moon. It's called the moon, the capital M. It's not as glorious as other names of other moons, but if it's capital M, you know that I'm talking about the moon that we have on our Earth. Okay, so the moon, our moon, is technically considered as a natural satellite. Now, people who are listening at home, if you have a working definition of the term satellite, you might imagine a thing that looks like probably a metal object with like some solar panels at the side going around the Earth. Probably that type of image comes into your mind. But if I may give you a more broader definition, satellite, okay, satellite means it's an object that orbits around a planet. So in this case, any planet could have a satellite orbiting around it. So most of the satellites that we see that are made by man, not man-made satellites, are considered as natural satellites. Under there, we can find categories of like the moon. So the moon that we have here is our only natural satellite. As far as we're concerned, it's the only one that we know, and the only one that we have been observing since time immemorial. So considered as a natural satellite, and not only that, it also has this uncanny ability to influence the tides of its oceans. So if you remember in your probably elementary, you've learned this in your elementary class, when you see that the moon is influencing the tides, it means that the moon's gravity is pulling towards all of the waters of the Earth in such a way that it creates the high tide, low tide of the Earth. That's why in calendars you can see that there are high tides and low tides over there. So you can see that the moon is not only significant as being the only natural satellite, it also is the driving force of the tides of the Earth's oceans. Probably a very large contributor, besides the sun, of course, but the moon contributes a lot when it comes to the tides of the Earth. More so that there are many different things that we do, especially maritime stuff that we do, that are reliant on the tides. So we are really on the mercy of how the moon behaves. Okay, next please. Okay, another thing you need to know as well, again, I won't be teaching much about the basics of the moon. That's for a different topic. For now, what we know about the moon as well is this. It has a weird revolution and rotation cycle. I say weird not because it's not unlike other moons, but because it becomes a great feature that we see here on Earth. And what that feature is rather is this. The moon revolves, meaning it goes around the Earth, as you can see here in the presentation. It goes around the Earth roughly about 27 days. So around that time, it's about 27.2 days, if I can recall correctly. So, okay, that means that 27 days, it will make a full elliptical orbit, not a circular orbit, a full elliptical orbit around the Earth. And if that doesn't remind you of something, what's the nearest thing, to those people who are in chat, what's the nearest thing that you can think of that lasts almost 27 days? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. And I think the clue is already in the name of the moon. Yes, if you're thinking about the month, yes, a month isn't necessarily 27 days, but it's closer than that. That's where we get the etymology of that word. So the revolution of the Earth is approximately 27 days, and it's a good way for us to actually have a measurement time. Now, okay, so another thing about it is its rotation. Revolution is one thing. If it revolves, okay, it's good. However, if it now rotates, once it starts rotating, it will also have a period of rotation of around 27 days, roughly around that area. So because of that, just imagine if you are going around the Earth, kung umiikot ka sa Earth, and then umiikot ka din, like you rotate from left to right or whatever direction you choose. At one point, whatever direction you look at the same object. So as a result of the moon's 27-day revolution and its 27-day rotation, it makes the illusion that the moon only has one side. So if you can go to Google right now, if you have access to Google, I'm sure if you're watching this stream, you have access to Google. And if you search for the images of the moon right now on Google, you would see that you have, what do you call this? The same picture. Okay, I encourage the viewers right now to go to Google Images, and you could try taking a look at, if you just like the word moon, you'd probably see the same face. Okay, so that's what I mean when its rotation and revolution cycle is uncanny as well. So you can see that the one side of the moon, roughly about 50-60% of the sides of the moon, is only visible to us. The other side, it's not visible, or that's what we call the dark side. It's called the dark side, by the way, not because it's related to Star Wars. Just a term. A better term would be the far side of the moon. So the dark side is not called dark because it's eternal night there, but because we can see it. That's literally it. We call it the far side or the dark side because we cannot see what's on the other side from here on Earth. Okay, I'll show you later some pictures that might interest you. Okay, next. Okay, here's something that probably did not make the textbooks. It probably did not got included in your textbook of science, but recently we had actual evidence that there is water. Okay, one moment. Okay. So we have evidence right now of moons having water, but not water as in liquid water, water as in ice water. Because if we know the physics of the moon, there are no ice there's no way rather for liquid water to persist there. There's no way for water in the form of something that's drinkable to exist there because of the sun's rays quickly what do you call this, decomposing, not evaporating. It decomposes the entirety of water. So as a result, water can only persist on the moon in the form of ice. And as we found out, on the lunar poles, there is ice. So now that we know that there is ice on the moon, we certainly know that we have a source of water that we can get there. Right? That might be something that you are not familiar with. Okay. Next. Okay. Now we are going to dive deep into the scientific fascination. When I mean the scientific fascination, I mean the actual. Wait. When I mean about the scientific fascination, I mean the way that humans have been able to know what the moon is in a scientific lens. Because one way for viewing the moon is actually looking at it and probably being inspired by it by making art. But another thing, and one thing that's very prominent in the field of science, is scientists, regular people, looking at the moon and trying to find out how to view it scientifically. So I'm here to now tell you a bit of a history of the scientific fascination of humanity of the moon. Next. Okay, so whenever we know that the moon is there, or sorry, the moon being an entity of ancient civilization, we always go back to those mythologies. So there's mga nakikinig ngayon who are very good at probably their English or Filipino subject and know a lot about the myths. Sa mga mahilig sa Afro-Asian, Greek, Roman, Norse type mythos, and also those who are studying history, those who like history very much, you will know that ancient civilizations revere the moon. So initially, the moon to them was like a deity, something that they could worship, something that represents something bigger than them. So that alone is a good starting point for mankind's fascination. Just imagine that you're not in here in the 21st century. Imagine you're back at around, let's say, 5,000 BC. Imagine being in an area like where in a regular part, there's no computer, so by the way, so you're probably just done farming, you're probably done foraging, you're probably done doing stuff ancient people do. And then just imagine looking up and seeing that white ball in the sky. Honestly, there's no way for them to actually Google stuff, or there's no way for them to look up for stuff. So to them, it must be something of grandeur, something that would be of high reverence. So most ancient civilizations attribute the moon to a deity. So I won't specify a lot, but for example, for the what do you call this? For the Romans, I think it's called Luna. For the Greeks, called Selene. And I think for the Norse mythologies, I think they had Norse not that ancient, but for the Norse people, I think they have a wolf designated for the moon. And for the Egyptians, I forgot the Egyptian god of the moon, but either way, there are a lot of different deities related to the moon. For Earth, for Earth, sorry, for the Philippines rather, we have. I think I only recall one legend about when there's an eclipse where it's the cause of a dragon called Bakunawa. Bakunawa, the dragon who eats the moon, and the only way for the dragon to spit out the moon is if you make a loud noise so that it'll spit it out. So again, it does sound like your grandmother or grandfather's story. It's like that, but take note, that's a good stepping stone for fascination. The first step in being fascinated is to try to explain what that unexplained thing is. In this case, it's the moon. So viewing the moon as a deity led the way for people to think maybe it's useful for other stuff. Because it's not just that it's there, it can probably help us do a lot of things. So from its transition, becoming like a deity, it now became a useful tool for navigation and timekeeping. By the way, they're not interchangeable. Okay, so there are certain civilizations that managed to use it first for navigation and timekeeping before attributing it as a deity pala rather, vice versa. But keep in mind, using it as a useful tool for navigation and timekeeping is something that was also important in the development of history. Because as we recall, those again who are fans of history lessons of your school, if you can recall, the moon was a good way for farmers to know when a month cycle has ended. The moon was also a good way to know for hunters to know when to hunt. Actually, in Northern American and some European cultures, we have used the different names of the moon. I believe there's one called the wolf moon. I cannot recall what month it is, but it is a moon attributed to a month. Regarding it's a cultural thing because they know exactly that at that moon, certain things happen. Let's say a lot of wolves come, or maybe the hunt is good, or maybe harvest is now. And also for navigation, I think this one is still applied up until now. If you're not aware, and again, you probably know this already, the moon, like the sun, rises from the east and sets in the west. So it's also a good way to know navigation. Whenever we can look at the moon and know where it moves, you can probably get a good idea on where is east, where is west. So imagine if it's useful for you. Imagine more how useful it is if it were from the people of the ancient times. Because back then, they didn't have GPS. Wala silang GPS noon, wala silang constructive maps. They only had the sky, celestial navigation. So that's one thing that sparked the scientific fascination of mankind about the moon. Next, please. Okay, now that we are done already with thinking of the moon as if it's an object in the sky that we could probably revere, now the earliest heavy thinkers, the philosophers, the astronomers, the earliest ones that we can recall in history, started seeing the moon differently. Because if you think about it as if it's a deity, or if you think about it only as a tool, I'm not saying that it's bad. It's shallow, for a lack of a better term. It's a bit shallow to think of the moon like that. Nobody really thought of it as like an object to study. And in such a way, there are early thinkers that have managed in time to tell us a little bit of the moon as an object. So thinking the moon as an object, you have to make different types of hypotheses here in order to try to verify a few things. So one thing here is I gave more emphasis on the Greek philosophers and the Greek astronomers, simply because they're the ones who started most, if not all, of the fascination of the moon as an object that we can see. So back then, while the moon did have its circular features, the Greeks did think that the moon was a very smooth sphere. if not perfectly smooth, they just thought of it as a sphere that's kind of perfect. But however, it was not enough for them to know that. They needed to know a lot of other things. So one astronomer in particular, Aristarchus was one of the first astronomers rather, to try to do something. So I think Eratosthenes, I think, is the Greek mathematician who has calculated the circumference, circumference, or was it the circumference? Yeah, I think it's the circumference of the Earth, or the diameter of the Earth. They had the numbers already, and then Aristarchus had a different approach. He was thinking, maybe I can use the size of the Earth in order to know how far away the moon is. And in doing so, develop an amazing computation, which, by the way, let's give him credit. His calculations were way off. Okay, just so everybody know, his calculations were a bit off. But other than that, imagine being the first person to think that there has to be a distance from the Earth to the moon. They're now seeing the moon as if it was an object. So knowing that they made that calculation, if I remember correctly, his calculations was like 3 times off from the actual calculations, if I can recall. So now that we know how a person in history tried to look at the moon as if it's an object, there was another Greek person who managed to think of it as another frontier. And probably this is the earliest form of thinking of the moon as a place, not just an object, but a place itself. So the philosopher Plutarch, while he's not very prominent in the astronomy field, he did, however, have some concerns on the way people view the moon. And on one of his writings, he fancied the idea. He did not say specifically or explicitly that the moon is inhabited by other beings. However, he did hint on the fact that we should not have that possibility removed. We should always keep that possibility active, or at least in talks. As far as we know, we have no idea if in the Greeks, by the way, as far as the Greeks know, they did not know if there are other beings there. They had no way to know if there are other people there. Maybe the gods live there. Maybe some other life form, some other animal live there. And one thing that you need to know about it, one moment. One thing you need to know about that kind of thinking is that was the first time people thought that the moon could be a place to live in. And it would probably be eroded away for a long time, up until the dawn of probably 1800s, where people began, there was a new curiosity. But we'll come to that later. So now let's move further into history and further away from the Greeks, as also the Indians and the Chinese were also doing some form of advancement towards understanding what the moon is as an object. So the early Chinese and Indians, in their own mythos also, they also attribute the moon to some sort of deity or probably a higher being. But the early Chinese and Indian astronomers have noted that the moon's light is not from itself. Due to extensive observation of how the phases of the moon are, which, by the way, I do hope you know how phases of the moon work. So the different types of the phases of the moon is not the result of the moon emitting its own light. The Chinese and Indians, nalaman nila that the moon, the apparent light of the moon, is just a reflection. And to many, many people back then, well, mostly people who have very, very solid beliefs, they think that's weird because that doesn't make sense. Or it doesn't make sense to some of them, but to most, it seems like it's a bit far-fetched that the moon does not emit its own light. But the Chinese and Indians were able to measure and give a bit of notes regarding how the moon simply reflects light off of the sun, and it does not have a light of its own. Later, evidences will show up showing that that may be true. Okay, that is true, by the way. Next slide. Okay, so now here we go to the frontiers of the start of scientific inquiry, or the birth of the scientific method. So right now, I will fast forward a little bit because there are a lot of astronomers that I can give detail on how they view the moon. There are many different astronomers who have taken their different accounts of how the moon should be placed on the celestial dome. But one famous artifact that we can go to is Galileo's first sketch. And why is this important? It's important not just because of its importance. I could argue it's also important because of the art that is involved. But one thing that we need to know is this was one of the first times rather, and think of, I'm saying one of the first. Later, as I'll include another information, it was one of the first times somebody did a scientific observation of the moon. And when I say scientific, it means that they're not just looking at the moon; they're trying to come up with a hypothesis on what the things they saw there actually are. So it's one thing to look, like the astronomers of China and India. They looked. They probably thought it was a reflection, but none of them were really that detailed or scientifically detailed. But Galileo was one of the first people to view the telescope via telescope in autumn of 1609, and also one of the people to actually sketch. As you can see here in the presentation, I hope you can see that. By the way, you can look at the lower right one. Sorry, this one. The lower right one over here, the singular one, the one that depicts the half moon over here, that's a sketch of the moon, which what appears to be, if you can look closely, if you recognize that, that's a crater. So he was one of the first people to theorize that the things that are in the moon are craters. And therefore, one of the earliest beliefs back then, isa sa mga pinaka-pinaniniwalaan ng mga tao noon, which was the moon was smooth, was actually false. The moon was not smooth. Instead, it was rugged. It was riddled with craters. And not only that, we can see here as well in the other manuscript, you can also see it there in the other illustrations, the 6 watercolor illustrations there, that the moon undergoes phases. So that again is, he's probably late in the party of understanding the phases. But again, nobody has given enough detail in writing down these types of information. He was one of the first. Right? And speaking of one of the first, next slide, please. Okay. There was another person who actually was the first person to do an illustration. So just to give him credit where credit is due, there was another person named Thomas Harriot. Thomas Harriot was also one of the, I think he was the first person to actually view the moon in the telescope and make an illustration. But the thing is, if you can look closely at his illustration doesn't really give us a lot of topographical information about the moon. However, it is worth noting rather that his illustration that is put there is something that would describe how the moon becomes a full moon or a crescent moon or a gibbous moon. It gives a depiction on how the moon progresses in its lunar cycle. So again, not fully scientific. It doesn't give us a lot of topographical information, but again, noteworthy. Other people before Galileo, I think a few months before Galileo, managed to think, wait, I can look at the moon, pwede ko tumingin sa moon, and I can write it down. I can draw the moon. And again, this will eventually go to a lot of inspirations of artworks. We will be discussing that a lot. Right, next please. Okay, I'll be jumping ahead very far from Galileo to the space race. But before I do jump in, I would like to add a few things first. So one of the few things that I will add would be the developments of how we now understand the moon as a geographical site. So geologists are very concerned with the composition of the moon. At the moment, back then, before the space race began, it was a big mystery, if I will be honest. It was a big mystery for other people to know what the moon is made out of. So with that mystery in hand, we can now know that there are things that are in the moon that we can explain by using geological terms. And what do I mean by that? The craters could, I'm not saying is, but could be volcanoes. The craters could be a result of volcanoes erupting, or it could be the result of moonquakes, not earthquakes, moonquakes, or maybe the rocks in the moon are very light to the point that a small mote of dust probably would create a crater. There are many different types of hypotheses that they managed to cook up. I think one of them is Shoemaker. You can look up his contributions on understanding the topography, the geological topography of the moon. But that didn't spark a lot of interest, not up until probably 1800s. They had talks of a moon colony, but then again, it probably died out very quickly. But not long after the resurgence of the discussion of the moon from 1800, there was another resurgence during the Cold War. So if you're a history buff, you'd know that the Cold War was a period after World War II. Okay, and two superpowers of the world at the time, the Soviet Union and the United States, were up against arms. But what made this fascinating, what made this thing amazing in the feat of knowing the fascination, understanding rather the fascination of the moon, is that this was the first time that the entire world would be dedicated enough to make any sort of technological progress just to reach the outer frontiers of Earth, quote unquote, the space race. So the space race was a weird era of our time, but I won't go deep into the space race. I will only go to the ones that will make significance to our fascination of the moon. So the first successful probe that managed to go into the moon and actually make contact with the moon. And when I say contact, like impact, tumama sa moon, okay, a hard landing. So the first Soviet probe that did that, and that is the first probe ever in humanity, was Luna 2. Okay, so Luna 2 was the first one that tried to make contact with the moon, and then knowing that that is possible, knowing that you can send something that we put in here, we made here on Earth, and put it on the moon, they sent another one not long after. I think they sent this Luna 2 on September 13, if I'm not mistaken, September 13, and they sent the third one, the third probe, Luna 3, on the dark side of the moon, the part that we cannot see on here on Earth, on October 7, if I remember correctly. They launched it, and it successfully managed to take photographs of the dark side of the moon on October 7, 1959. This was before the moon landing. And again, take note, the Soviets were the first people to actually take photos. And it's a sort of fascination thing. Have you seen, I'm pretty sure the people who are listening right now, you already know the, what do you call this? Probably a quote that's been circulating in Facebook. The one that says, if you want to see what people care about, look at what they take a photo of. I think this is a good reflection of it, because we really, as human beings, we really do care about wanting to see what the moon looks like. So by the way, that photo that you can see there, that blurry photo, that's the first image of the dark side of the moon, okay? Or the far side of the moon. Later, I'll give you a better image, okay? So next, please. This one I won't go into much detail because this will be discussed later. So this was a thing that is a cornerstone. I think we should already know this, that on July 20, I think it's in a few days from now, the 51st anniversary, the Apollo 19 mission was the first mission to successfully land humans on the moon. So the first probe actually led the way. The first probe, we know that the probe hit the moon. So if a probe can do that, humans can do that. And not long after, I mean, just the span of 10 years, humanity, in the form of NASA's Apollo 11 mission, was able to land a man on the moon on July 20, 1969. This was one of the first times humanity has stepped outside of the Earth. From here, I've read a lot of different opinions and articles regarding this. You can also take a look at some of them online. But you can kind of see how the fascination of the moon here shifted a little bit. The idea that the moon was just a mere object kind of faded a little bit. It kind of sparked the idea that the moon might be the next destination. The moon might be the next place for us to visit, that the moon might be the next home for humans for a while. Okay? But then, unfortunately, there are a lot of other things that happened. I won't go a big detail into that. So, next slide, please. However, due to the loss of fascination to the moon, it did not stop any form of astronomical advancement as the European Space Agency, European Union rather, China, India, Japan, Canada, and a lot of other countries. I think Australia also has one. They started making their own space agencies. So you can see the logos of ESA, JAXA, the ISRO, I think that's for India, and CNSA. Those are the agencies of space agencies of the various countries and unions that you can see there. They did not just make those types of space agencies just to make satellites for communication, just for satellites to understand the Earth more. They actually made missions. You can if you go to their websites, you can see a full list of their missions, of lunar missions rather. So they made their own unmanned lunar missions. By the way, the term here is unmanned, meaning it's something that is not crewed, walang taong kasama, walang taong silang pinadala sa moon. So this was one of the things that made it into a world collaboration. This was now, I think, long after the Cold War. People were seeing in a world scale view that we can actually do this as an entire species, as humans. But of course, it had to start with the solidarity of states. So first, the EU, the European Space Agency, was born after the EU decided that it was necessary for them to create a space agency. Japan found it useful to found a space agency of their own. So did India and China. And again, later I'll show, actually the next slide pala will show you, please, next slide. So that is the end of the history that I'll be discussing. Now, one thing that I need to discuss last is this one, something to look forward to. I know the word here says history, and to imply history is to say that it already happened. But I hope, like me, you are also hopeful that this will happen. And this is what I mean. Those space agencies I mentioned, they are now part of the collaborators. Most of them are a part in the collaboration with NASA for the Artemis program. So if I would gladly like you to go and search for the Artemis program right now, or learn further about the program's mission. But its basic mission is to send the humans back on the moon, hopefully the first woman on the moon by 2034. So the Artemis program would be a collaborative effort of different space agencies from the ESA, JAXA, Australian ASA, Australian Space Agency, and also other companies that are private space companies like SpaceX. Boeing, I think, has collaboration with that. So there are different types of companies that are also helping NASA in achieving this dream of us going back to the moon. Long-term, by the way, long-term effect of this going back to the moon is the possibility of having a space station there, or at least a place for humans to settle there, to build inexpensive ships to go further away. Again, the goal is Mars, but for now, our stretch goals would be probably up until the moon first. If we can do it on the moon, we can do it on Mars. Okay, so that's just something to look forward to. Next, please. Okay, so we're nearing the end of my discussion, but before I do end my discussion, I'd like to show you a few notable pictures of the moon, the notable photographs. Again, one thing that probably circulating on Facebook was the idea that whatever you take a picture of, you probably care about it, diba? If you care about your parents, you probably take a lot of pictures of them. If you care about your dog, you probably take pictures of your dog a lot. Now, as humans, you can see now the fascination of the humans that have studied the moon, who have tried to survey it, who tried to make sense of what it is. They now try to keep that, make it immortal, those types of scenarios. So right now, you can see here, there are notable photos. Please, next slide. The first photo isn't really a new photo. It's the photo that I use here in the presentation. If you can see. By the way, to those who are listening, if you have any questions, feel free to write them. We would gladly answer them later in our question and answer portion. So just write them, we will curate them, and then later we will answer them. Okay. So again, feel free to ask us questions. We will be happy to answer them. So right now, we have one notable photo here, which is the visible side of the moon. Now, a thing you need to know about the visible side of the moon is this. This is something that we have seen 1,000 times. I might be exaggerating a little bit when I say 1,000,000,000 times, but I'm pretty sure that's not wrong. We have seen this a lot of times. And the thing is, every time it does change its phases, every time it undergoes possible eclipses, people are still fascinated by it. So just so you did not see the finer intricacies of the moon, that is what the visible side of the moon looks like in roughly about 720p. Okay, so if you really want a bright view of the moon, you can check out a lot of sites. I will be sharing to you some sites later, or some sites that will give you higher resolution pictures of the moon. Okay, so one thing as well is that if you also want to view this, obviously right now we can't do it. Hindi namin pwede gawin kasi of the issue of the pandemic. But hopefully in the near future, when things work out well, when we are finally back to normal, we would probably have telescope viewings. If you want to look at the visible side of the moon, like with your own eyes, you can catch us in our free telescope viewings, hopefully in the near future. But for now, we don't have. So, okay. Next slide, please. So I did mention before that the Soviets have managed to take a picture of the far side of the moon. And if you can recall, that picture isn't exactly Instagram worthy. Okay, it's not really something you can post and say, VSCO, hashtag VSCO something, or whatever hashtag you use to say that your photos are of high quality. But right now, as you can see here in the far side of the moon, okay, that thing that you are seeing right now is not the front side, it's the far side. And as you can see, it has a little bit of differences when it comes to the near side. The near side has a lot of these dark spots. I'll go into detail later what those dark spots are called, rather. But if you can look closer to the lower left side of the dark side of the moon, you'll see it's more riddled with craters. Mas madami siyang craters, right? Probably because it faces away from the Earth, and probably the materials, meteors, comets, whatever astronomical object that planned to hit Earth probably hit the far side of the moon. That might be a good hypothesis on why the moon's far side is riddled with a lot of different craters over there. But as you can see here, the far side of the moon looks very different. And it's a step higher than the one that the Soviets have actually taken the photo. Okay, next please. Okay, now, here we are. I do hope this next slide can be seen because I'm watching the stream right now. It doesn't look like you can see some of the text here. I do hope you can see the text, but this photo that I'm showing you right now, that's the map of the visible side of the moon. So then again, we are now looking at the moon again as if it's a place. That fascination to look at the place itself and make landmarks is something that a lot of people tend to forget about, let's say, preserving something, preserving a place. Okay, so right now, as you can see here, the moon is divided into different maps, different sectors. Right, by the way, if you could just barely read that one over there, the one that has dark spots there, it has the word mare or mare. Okay, so mare or mare is Latin, if I recall correctly, Latin for sea. So mare tranquillatis, I think that's even I can read it from my slide over here. It's the Sea of Tranquility. By the way, lunar mares are like the dark patches there that are usually flat without a lot of craters. And by the way, if you can look at the different names, if you can view it, hopefully, you'll see that some of the craters there are named after scientists and astronomers. Usually that's the case. Sometimes they name it after, I think they name it also after poets. So again, this is the fascination of us looking at the moon as if it was a place, to the point that even the smaller details that make up the face of the moon, we have to assign a name for it. Okay, next. Okay, this one might be a weird one because it's too long. But if you want a full version of this thing, I would really like you to go to Wikipedia or maybe the Chinese Space Agency's website. You can go to the Chinese CNSA website. And you can take a look at this shot. By the way, this was a panorama. And the first one to be taken not from the near side of the moon, but rather from the far side of the moon. The Chang'e 4, that's not Change 4, by the way. That's the Chang'e 4 of the Chinese Space Agency. So the Chang'e 4 successfully took a panorama of the far side of the moon. Now, this far side picture looks barren, but then again, that's what the thing is supposed to look like. And again, the fascination for us that we already know what it looks like, yet we have a probe, we have Chang'e 4 that successfully soft landed on the moon, and we still managed to take a picture of a panorama of it. Again, just giving you an idea of how fascinated people are with regards to the moon. Okay, next slide, please. And I think this is the last photo that I'll be showing you. This one is a bit interesting because I'll be also sharing with you something that you might be looking forward to. I do hope you are looking forward to this. So that is a total lunar eclipse, or what we call the blood moon. Okay, I think the last blood moon was 2017, 2018. I actually cannot recall because I was not able to look up the last lunar eclipse or the last blood moon. So if you were around, if you were available during the time, you might remember that the moon suddenly turned red. Right? It's because the Earth's shadow is passing through the surface of the moon, and the light that pierces through the Earth's atmosphere, the colors get diffracted, and then only the red, the lower wavelengths go in, and then the red pigmentation goes towards the moon and then goes back to us. So that's why it makes the effect of having the blood color, quote unquote. So the total lunar eclipse is one of the few times we get to see the face of the moon in a different way. That's why it's something that astronomers like to view. We like to take note of this specific event because this is one of the times that the thing that we see in the night sky actually significantly changes. That shading enough is to make it a marvelous detail to what an already magnificent celestial object. So if you are wondering, by the way, when is the next total lunar eclipse? The next total lunar eclipse is on next year. Mark your calendars, by the way. If you are listening right now, open your calendar, mark it right now, 2021. I think it's on, I'm double checking it right now. Okay, yes, it's on May 26, 2021. So those people who are listening right now, mark your calendars, go to your calendar phone, mark it on the 26th of May 2021, there will be a total lunar eclipse. However, we won't be seeing in the Philippines the beginning of the eclipse. We will be only seeing probably not exactly after. We will be seeing it before the total eclipse begins, but we won't be seeing it as it goes to the slight reddening. Right? So that's one thing to look forward to. I think that's one of the eclipses that we can look forward to. There's another eclipse that will be happening this year. I'll double check later what date will that be. But yes, if you can look at the lunar eclipse, a total lunar eclipse or a blood moon, again, it would be an amazing thing to see. I hope you do enjoy it. When you do see it, I hope you enjoy seeing the blood moon. Okay, next, please. So now I'll be ending my discussion. But in me ending my discussion, I'll be going into something of a personal thing. So a bit of forewarning for everybody. Whatever I'm going to say right now is something that I can take away. Hopefully I can share with you some values that we can learn about our fascination with the moon. Right? And I hope you do share the sentiment with me. So the thing is, growing up, we as kids were probably taught that the moon was something that's in the night sky and that the moon was always there. It will never go away. Well, that was what we were taught back then. It will never go away. It will never change. It will still light up the night sky whenever we need to. And I think that's one good way to those parents or to those people with children around. I think that's a good way for us to pique the scientific fascination for the moon. It's one of the first steps towards developing what we call a cosmic perspective. And you can probably hear the word cosmic perspective with a lot of astronomers talking about it. It's the perspective that we know that we are part of this universe, that we are a single thing that is included in the universe. Learning about the moon, learning about what it is, learning about its patterns, and learning about its significance is something that will teach us, not just kids, but also adults, also hopefully the people who are watching this. This will teach us a lot about how we view the moon as an object. Because it now becomes viewing the moon as a part of us. Again, cosmic perspective. The moon being part of the Earth, technically, it is a part of who we are as humanity. Because it's nice to know that the planet that we're living in, Earth itself, is very lucky to have a moon that revolves around it and has a lot of different roles, from the influence of our tides to lighting up our night skies due to the reflection of sunlight. And again, as I've shown, different types of inspirations to show for the people, different types of ways to show people that the moon can still lead us to somewhere that we have not yet gone, whether it be physical or something artistic or creative. Next, please. And to really conclude it and to wrap it up, remember this. The first person probably to look at the moon never really thought about how far we'll go. Going back a few thousand years, I'm pretty sure the first person would not expect us that we as a species has managed to reach as far as the moon. So not only should the moon remind us about our cosmic perspective, it should also remind us that we have inner curiosities. We have questions inside of us, different things that we do not know. What can we do? How far can we go? It can tell us a lot about our curiosities as human beings. It can tell us a lot about our technological capabilities, how far we will develop technology just to go there. And most importantly, I think this most important one, our artistic and creative sides as humans. It shows to us that the moon is a goal that we can look forward to. This is something that we can shoot for. This is something that we can look up to in order to be inspired. Again, if anything, it's something human. Knowing that the moon still inspires us is a mark of being a human. Remember, whenever we can showcase what we can do, or whatever we can accomplish, rather, we do it because we want to, and we want to shoot farther than what we can. Look back to the people who once were thinking, what is the moon? And then look back to the people who were thinking, what is the moon? And then look back to the people thinking, can we go to the moon? Imagine what questions would arise from today's generation when we're talking about the moon. I do hope you reflect on that, and I do hope you find some values in that. And of course, to really end my discussion, please, next slide. Okay, this next slide is a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, who is the author of, I believe, 2001, A Space-Time Odyssey. So his quote is this: the moon is the first milestone on the road to the stars. And I do hope this discussion that I have is your first milestone on the road to understanding of having a cosmic perspective and to understanding more about the world that we live in and the universe that we are in. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. That is my discussion, and I will be posting here some cool sites for you to visit. I suggest you screenshot them. They are really interesting sites to see. I assure you, you'd learn a lot about from going to these sites. First one is a site of NASA depicting their Artemis program. I do hope you enjoy this Artemis program site that they have there. You also have here the page for the moon that NASA has already have here. There's a detailed site here. If you want to see the moon as if it was in the Google Maps format, if you've seen Google Maps and its amazingness, you can now see also the moon in the amazing Google Maps format by going to google.com/moon. And there's also another one, a better map, if I may say, the CSEligman.com. That is one that will show you a detailed map of the moon. And the last one is another site from NASA. I think that one gives us the updates for the LRO, or the Lunar Reconnaissance Observatory. Right? So the LRO is a device that we use right now on the moon to survey it and to make different types of advancements. So I hope you have a nice day and may clear skies be with you for the rest of the year. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Doods Perea. That was really a very interesting talk about our fascination of the moon. And
Thank
in
you very
fact,
much,
I'll
sir.
pick it up from there because our fascination of the moon would lead us later into our exploration of the
Yes.
moon. All right. For your information, my dear netizens, Mr. Doods Perea was my former student. Yan, ang galing-galing niya, no? Ayan, so magaling siya talaga. Mas magaling pa yan sa akin.
Grabe naman, sir.
All right, and Mr. Doods Perea mentioned also something about telescope viewings of the moon. So, the BEDAN Society of Young Astronomers also conducts public telescope viewings at malls, parks, and kung saan na maraming tao. And we are also members of the Manila Street Astronomers, wherein they also do the same thing. In fact, sila talaga yung pasimuno ng street astronomy,
Yes.
yung Manila Street Astronomers. So, kung nakikinig po yung mga members like sila Mr. Alindao, Miss
Hello
Pantaleon,
po.
so magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. The Manila Street Astronomers really paved the way for us BSYA to also conduct public telescope viewings. Okay, so thank you very much, dudes.
Thank you din
And
po. And
I
again,
will pick.
just to remind lang the audience po that, again, if you have any questions, if you have any clarifications, if you want to ask us something about astronomy, feel free to ask your questions. We would be happy to answer your questions right away. And if you've missed my lecture or if you missed any one of our lectures, you can always rewatch this. I think they will post the live stream VOD later. So you can go back and take a look at the lectures that we gave here. So just in case you missed a few, you can go there. And I'll be in the chat later posting the links of the stuff that I have shown so that there's easy access for you to take a look. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you din sa mga nasa chat. Thank you po. Sir Joseph, thank you din po for tuning in.
Our next speaker is Sir Cajigal, who will be talking about the Apollo project or the history of the Apollo project. Sir Jude?
Okay. All right, so I am back, my dear netizens. So I will now be discussing with you our fascination of the moon by dreaming about going to the moon. Okay, going to space. Si Dudes, magaling yan sa astronomy and talagang hilig niya talaga yan. Also, when I was a kid, nung bata pa ako, talagang mahilig na talaga akong sa astronomy. Minsan nga, umakit ako sa bubong namin sa bahay. O, titingin lang, hihiga lang ako doon, dadalhin ko yung kumot ko, yung unan ko, and just look at the stars, saka yung buwan. Yun. So, and another big influence of me going into this field of astronomy is watching science fiction. Okay, now next slide. Okay, so we will be discussing the history of Project Apollo. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I started my my fascination for astronomy by watching science fiction movies. Okay. All right. So that's my childhood dream of going to space. Yan. So one TV show that really influenced me was next slide please. Okay, Star Trek. Okay, Star Trek really had influenced my fascination of going into space. So next slide. So you could see I was fascinated with the Starship Enterprise. Okay, next slide. And that quote where no man has gone before. Yeah, talagang tumatak yan sa utak ko. And to boldly go where no man has gone before. Okay, next slide. Okay, and that famous Vulcan salute by Mr. Spock. Yan, if you know Mr. Spock. Yan, okay. Another TV series, kung alam niyo ito, siguro marami sa hindi nakakalam nito. Next slide was Thunderbirds. Okay, Thunderbirds are go. Yan, itong mga characters dito, hindi tunay na tao, but they are marionettes, parang puppet. Ang galing nga, nung pinapanood ko to nung bata ako, talagang amazed na amazed ako sa mga spaceship nila, yung mga craft nila, yung mga rockets. Okay, next slide. Okay, like this one, ito yung Thunderbird 2. Yan, yung malaking ano yan, Thunderbird 2 and Thunderbird 1. Okay, next slide. Okay, another TV series was also related to Thunderbirds. Ito yung Zero X. Yan, fascinated ako talaga sa spaceship na to, Zero X. So, nagpunta yan sa Mars. Parang space shuttle yan. It would take off like an airplane and it would also land like an airplane. Pero nakapunta yan sa Mars. So, that's Zero X. Galing, no? Okay, next slide. Okay, another TV series. Ito, talagang amazed na amazed ako dito. Was UFO. Yan, UFO or Unidentified Flying Object. Ito gawa to ng mga British, sci-fi ng mga British. Ito, ang galing nga eh. Next slide. Ang galing ng mga spaceship nila. Pati yung moon base, meron silang moon base. Ang galing. Ayan, you can see this. Ayun, nasa moon base sila. Okay, trying to detect the entry of unidentified flying objects. Okay, next. This is the Interceptor spacecraft na nasa moon base nila that destroys UFO. Ito yung first line of defense nila, yung Interceptor spaceship nila. Okay, next. Okay, and ito, fascinated ako dito sa spaceship na to. This is Skydiver. Yan. Sky, ito yung lumilipad na spacecraft. Then yung diver, may submarine niya. Nandun yung spacecraft nasa submarine. Ang galing nga, palang take off. Oh, look, nasa ilalim sila ng dagat. Okay, talagang fascinated ako dyan sa mga sci-fi and that really influenced me to love astronomy. Okay, next. Okay, meron pa. Nung bata ako, din maganda rin tong sci-fi na to, Space 1999. Ito, ang setting nito nasa buwan. Okay, next slide. So, makikita niyo yung mga lunar craft nila called Eagle. Kinuha yan doon sa pangalan ng Eagle, yung lunar module ng Apollo 11. Ang galing, nasa moon base din sila. They were able to establish a lunar colony. Yan. Kaya lang may nangyari sa buwan the moon was it escaped out of its orbit tapos they're now drifting into outer space. Ayan, so that's Space 1999. Okay, next slide. Ayan, that's moon-based alpha. Okay, ang galing nga eh. Nung pinapanood ko ito nung bata ako, talagang tululaway ako just to watch and be fascinated about our moon. Pag nakikita ko itong EL spacecraft tapos yung lunar base nila, ang galing. Okay, next. Next slide. Okay, next slide again. And that's the moon-based alpha and its crew. Okay. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide. Ayan, ito yung mga scenes sa Space 1999. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay, so how did man's dream of going to the moon or going to space started? Okay, ito yung sasagutin natin. So how did man's dream of going to the moon or even going to space started? So it all started with the Chinese. Okay, next. So the Chinese developed fireworks, rockets. So they were the inventors of rocketry. Yan, yung mga Chinese. Next slide. And they used rockets for fireworks. Rockets were used, next slide, as fireworks. Okay. Okay, so next slide. Okay, next slide. Ayan. So the Chinese, they developed fireworks using those rockets. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so there's this legend, Chinese legend about an astronomer strapping himself in a chair filled with fireworks. Then when the fireworks were ignited at the same time, that astronomer with the chair was propelled upwards pero hindi na nakita. Ayun. And later, we have Jules Verne. Ayan, si Jules Verne. Next slide. Ayan, Jules Verne wrote this book From the Earth to the Moon. Ayan, ito, nabasa ko na itong libro na ito and talagang Jules Verne was able to picture out how to conduct a visit, manned visit to the moon. And I think until NASA, through the Apollo program, was able to adapt many of the what was written in this book From the Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne. So ang galing, next slide. So in this book, yan may parang giant bullet. Yan, itong bullet na to, parang ito yung space capsule. So nandyan yung mga occupants, yung mga tinatawag natin na astronauts. Next slide. And this giant bullet was placed inside a giant cannon. Yan. So pinasok yung bullet na yan sa isang malaking kanyon and that cannon was fired to the moon. Next slide. Yan. So can you see that giant cannon? Yan. So the cannon was it was ignited, then that bullet was propelled towards the moon. Galing, di ba? So parang predict na ni Jules Verne on how to go to the moon. Ayan, okay? Next. Ayan, so nakarating yung bullet na yan, nakarating sa buwan. Okay, next. Then we have this American by the name of Robert Goddard. Okay, si Robert Goddard. Now, Robert Goddard built the world's first liquid-fueled rocket. Yan. Kasi yung mga Chinese, the fuel that drives their fireworks was gunpowder, di ba? We know that the Chinese, they invented gunpowder. Gunpowder is a form of solid fuel. Solid fuel yan. Ang disadvantage ng solid fuel, it is difficult to control. Once the solid fueled rocket is ignited, yan na, puputok na yan. Lilipad na yan. And you will not be able to control the exhaust gases. But in a liquid fueled rocket, you can control the ejection of the hot gases. Yun ang maganda sa liquid fueled rocket. And this was made by Robert Goddard. Okay, next slide. Okay, so you can see here the prototype rocket that he built together with some of his engineers, and using liquid fuel, kerosene, yan, and the liquid oxygen. So yun ang ginamit nila to propel the rocket. Okay, next. Okay. And what is amazing about Robert Goddard is that he also, like Jules Verne, he was able to come up with an explanation on how to visit the moon. Yan. Okay? So that's his picture explaining how can we visit the moon using his solid fueled rocket. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we have a German scientist by the name of Hermann Oberth. Now, this rocket scientist, meron siyang parang apprentice by the name von Braun. Okay, si von Braun. Okay, next slide. Okay, si Werner von Braun. Okay, together with Oberth, they developed the V2 rocket for Nazi Germany. Okay, eto si Werner von Braun is he was crucial in the development of the American space program. Si Werner von Braun, ano yan? He's a Nazi official. Yan, ano siya? Halos kanang kamay yan ni Adolf Hitler. And Werner von Braun was the brainchild, together with Hermann Oberth, the V2 rocket. And eventually, Werner von Braun also constructed the Saturn V for the United States, which carried the Apollo spacecraft to the moon. Okay, next slide. So that's Werner von Braun. Yan. So nakita niyo itong picture na to ni Werner von Braun together with some top-ranking German officials. So talagang ano siya? He's a Nazi official. Okay? Kaya siya sumali dyan, he just wanted funding for his rocket program. Hindi naman siya interesado sa power. Werner von Braun dreamed of going into space. So ginamit lang niya yung Nazi and kanyang influence para magawa lang niya yung mga experiments niya in rocketry. Werner von Braun really dreamt of going into space. Yan, yun ang kanyang objective. Okay, so next slide, you can see here some pictures again of Werner von Braun with some top Nazi officials. Okay, next. Okay, yan siya. Nakita niyo to, yung encircled picture yan, si Werner von Braun yan with top-ranking officials of Nazi Germany. Okay, next. Okay, so here's another picture of Werner von Braun with his mentor Hermann Oberth. Okay, they dreamt of going into space. Okay, next. All right, and in this picture, we have the V2 rocket. Ito yung dinevelop ni Werner von Braun, the V2 rocket. The V2 rocket was the first intercontinental ballistic missile. So, dinevelop yan ni Werner von Braun, tapos lalagyan nila yan ng explosives dun sa payload bay, yung sa taas, yung pointed part ng rocket. And they launched it to destroy London during World War II. And they were quite successful in bombing London using the V2 rocket. Galing. Next slide. Yan. So, ayan, ito yung V2 rocket. Yan, being launched, yan, papunta yan sa London. May laman yan ng mga explosives. Yan, parang ano yan, ICBM. The V2 rocket was the first intercontinental ballistic missile. Pero si Werner von Braun, ayaw niya talaga. Parang he was against developing the V2 rocket to kill the enemies of Nazi Germany. Ang gusto lang niya talaga is to go into space. Yun ang gusto niya eh. Okay, next. And what's so special about the V2 rocket is that the V2 rocket was able to pass through the Kármán line. Okay, my dear netizens, if you're familiar with the layers of the atmosphere, itong Kármán line is the beginning of outer space. And the V2 rocket was able to surpass the Kármán line. So technically, nakapunta na yung V2 sa space. So meron siyang capability of going into space. Okay? Right? Kaya lang, di ba, ang Kármán line nasa ionosphere eh. So parang, wait, di ba pag sinabi nating outer space, dapat lampas na yan ng exosphere. Alright, so probably we'll have another talk about this. So bakit yung Kármán line nasa, nasa thermosphere actually yung Kármán line. Okay. Alright, so that's the capability of the V2 rocket. The V2 rocket was able to surpass even the Kármán line. Okay, next. Okay, so what we have here now is a flow chart kung ano nangyari sa mga Nazi rocket scientists, especially si Obert and si Werner von Braun. So there was a rocket scientist, Nazi German rocket scientist by the name of Helmut Gottrup. Yan. At the end of World War II, si Gottrup was captured by the Russians. Pero he was not executed for his war crimes. So ang ginawa ng the then Soviet Union, USSR, he developed the Russian space program, the Soviet space program. While Hermann Oberth and Werner von Braun was captured by the Americans, by the United States through Operation Paperclip. Yan. And Werner von Braun was a key personality in the formation of the American space program. Okay, next slide. Okay, ayan. So we have here in this picture Werner von Braun talking to the Americans. Yan. He's now surrendering to the Americans. And later he would develop the American space program. Okay, next slide. Okay. All right, then on October 4, 1957, ito, very crucial to in the history of manned space flight. October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union sent into orbit the first artificial satellite. Yung sinabi ni Doods kanina, di ba, the moon is our natural satellite. Ito, grabe to. Sputnik 1 was the first artificial satellite. Gawang tao. Okay, and this artificial satellite orbited the Earth. Yan parang buwan. Kaya lang gawa ng tao to. And Sputnik's launch captured the world. Talagang pati yung mga Amerikano nagulintan sa pag-launch ng Soviet Union of Sputnik 1. Natakot sila kasi baka ang Sputnik 1, ang laman niyan would be nuclear warheads. Baka bombahan ng mga Amerikano ng mga nuclear weapons. Kaya takot sila sa Sputnik 1. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is Sputnik 1. Para lang siyang metal sphere with 4 antennas. Yan. Saka walang laman yan, parang lang yan. It's a radio transmitter producing a beeping sound. Yan, parang beep, 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 ganon. Pero naririnig yan sa radyo ng mga Amerikano, kaya pag dumadaan yung Sputnik 1, natatakot sila. Okay, next slide. Yan, and it was really, it became the headlines in American newspapers. Russians, they win the race to launch the Earth's first artificial satellite. Yan. Okay, next. Yan. So pag dumadaan ng Sputnik 1, ayan, yung mga Amerikano lalabas sa kanilang bahay. They will get their binoculars and they will just be fascinated about this first artificial satellite that was launched by the Russians. Okay, next. Next slide. Okay. Ayan. So, tuloy-tuloy ang pag-ano ng mga Russians. They are now winning what we call the space race na banggit ni Doods kanina yan about the space race. So, in November 3, 1957, Sputnik 2 was launched. Yan. Okay? And what's so special about Sputnik 2 is that there's a pilot on board. May aso sa loob ng Sputnik 2. The dog's name was Laika. Yan. Okay? Kaya lang ang problema ng Sputnik 2, there was not enough life support para dun sa aso. And eventually, Laika died. Inamatay din yung aso sa loob ng Sputnik 2. Okay, next slide. Okay, then, yung mga Amerikano naman, ayaw magpatalo. Ayaw nila magpatalo. Then, February 1, 1958, Explorer 1 was launched by the Americans. Okay? So, Explorer 1 was developed again by, guess who? Wernher von Braun. Yan. It orbited the Earth for 12 years. Yan. And Explorer 1 was able to obtain valuable information about the Earth's magnetic field. Yan, yun ang isa sa mga achievements ng Explorer 1. Okay, next slide. Ayan, so you can see in this picture, yung encircled picture, that's Wernher von Braun. Yan, binubuhat niya yung replica ng Explorer 1. Yan, proud na proud siya dyan. Yan, yun ang kanilang retaliation against the Russians. Okay, next slide. Okay, then on October 1, 1958, and a famous American agency was formed. And guess what? That's NASA. Okay, NASA, or National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Okay, NASA has several goals. Yan, to gather data about the Earth's atmosphere, in outer space, to test new technologies for launching rockets, and of course, guess what? To beat the Russians. Yan. Kasi gusto talaga nilang matalo yung mga Russians na yan. So, they came up with a space agency called NASA. Okay, next slide please. All right, and in 1959, NASA began searching for test pilots. Yan, kasi yun ang kailangan in one requirement for space travel. Dapat ano yan, very healthy, and they considered test pilots for their new manned spaceflight program called Project Mercury. Yan, ito yung first program ng NASA, or Project Mercury. So we have here seven astronauts, pioneer astronauts for Project Mercury. Next. Okay, this is the space capsule of the Mercury program. Maliit lang yung capsule niyan. Isang tao lang yung pwedeng sumakay dyan. Okay, next. Okay, and there were two launch systems. First, you have the Redstone. Yan. Ang Redstone, ballistic missile yan. So, ginamit nila ang ballistic missile to explore space. Hindi na pangpatay ng mga ng tao. Yan, so we have the Redstone, then later we have the Atlas rocket. Yan, mas malakas tong Atlas rocket. The Atlas rocket is also an intercontinental ballistic missile. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned a while ago, the Project Mercury has 7 astronauts. Ayan, so Walter Schirra, Slayton, John Glenn, if you are familiar with John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth. Then we have Scott Carpenter, ayan si Virgil Gus Grissom, famous din yan, but he died later in Apollo 1. We'll discuss it later. And si Gordon Cooper. Yan, these are the so-called Mercury 7 astronauts. By the way, the Americans would call their spacemen astronauts. Ang mga Russians, cosmonauts. Okay, next. Okay, then, naku, malaking sampal to sa US. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin in Vostok 1 blast off and orbited the Earth. Yan, Yuri Gagarin was the first man to orbit the Earth. Okay? So talagang malaking blow to sa American space program. Completing one orbit and parachuting for a few miles off the ground. And that's Yuri Gagarin. Remember that, ha? Take note of his name, Yuri Gagarin. Okay, next slide. Okay, then, hindi nagpaawat ang mga Amerikano. So, nagpadala din sila ng isang astronaut using the Redstone rocket by the name of Alan Shepard. He was the first American in space. Kaya lang hindi siya nag-orbit sa Earth. Lang siya, suborbital flight. Okay? On board Freedom 7. Yan. Kasi yung Redstone was not a very powerful rocket. So, hindi niya nakayanan yung orbital speed of 17,000 miles per hour. Okay, next. That's Alan Shepard. Alright, then came John Glenn. And John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth on board Friendship 7. Okay, launched by the Atlas rocket. Yan, like what I have mentioned a while ago, the Atlas rocket was a more powerful rocket compared to the Redstone. And John Glenn was able to orbit the Earth. Yan, okay? So that's, tandaan niyo yung name, ha? John Glenn. Okay. Next slide. Okay, then, hindi naman nagpatalo tong mga Russians. Okay, Vostok 6 blasted off in Russia, June 16. Oh, ano yan? Yung isang araw. Okay, 1963. Isang araw, June pala, last month. July pala ngayon. Okay, on board was the first woman in space. Yan. So, sila, babaeng cosmonaut. Okay, by the name of Valentina Tereshkova. Alright? Okay, beating the Americans again. The first woman in space was Valentina Tereshkova. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Alright, so with the Russians leading the space race, yan, kasi ang dami lang nilang achievements eh. First woman in space, first man to orbit the Earth, first dog in space. Yan, so the Russians were leading the space race. The United States government shifted its priorities to winning the space race. So yun na naging objective ng mga Amerikano, is to win the space race. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's now the objective. And with their new president, si John F. Kennedy, nag-speech siya in front of the American people. Ang sinabi niya, I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out. 1961 sinabi niya to. So dapat by 1969, they should have landed a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. Yeah. So, John F. Kennedy set a deadline. Nagbigay siya ng deadline. By the end of the decade, dapat makapagpadala na tayo ng tao sa buwan and returning him safely to the Earth. Okay? So talagang yun ang naging priority ngayon ng US to beat the Russians. Ayan, next slide. Ayan, so ito yung next slide niya. Ito nag-uusap sila, John F. Kennedy, saka si James Webb. Yan, he was the NASA administrator at that time. So sabi ni Kennedy, let's aim for the moon. Let's beat the damn Russians to the moon. Yun ang sabi ni John F. Kennedy kay James Webb. Pero naku, laking question mark kay James Webb. Eka po, Mr. President, paano tayo pupunta sa moon and back? Wala pang technology of going to the moon and returning the astronauts safely to the Earth. So they have to develop it from scratch. Ganon ang ginawa ng mga Amerikano, to develop new technologies so that they can reach their goal of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. Okay, next slide please. Okay, so let us now discuss the rocket, yung paano sila makakapunta sa buwan. So, ito yung rocket na dinevelop. Okay, it was the mighty Saturn V. Next slide. Okay, and the Saturn V rocket. Oh, can you see the picture? Oh, sino yung nandun? Katabi ni John F. Kennedy. Well, you guess it. It's Wernher von Braun. Yeah, si Wernher von Braun was the key figure in the development of the mighty Saturn V. Yan, si John F. Kennedy, tiwalang-tiwala siya kay Wernher von Braun. Okay, next slide. Ayan, madalas silang nag-uusap. Ayan, dapat matalo natin yung mga Russians na yan. We have to develop the Saturn V. By the end of the decade, makapag-landing tayo ng tao sa buwan. Okay, next slide. Ayan, this is Wernher von Braun again. Saka si Hermann Oberth in this picture. Diba? Okay, next slide. So they were developing the Saturn V. Okay, so these are the sections of the Saturn V launch vehicle. All right, so the Saturn V is made up of 3 stages. So we have the first stage, ito yung pinakamalaki, and if you will notice, there are 5 F1 engines. Malalaki itong mga F1 engines na ito. And then we have the second stage, the third stage, and the Apollo spacecraft itself. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next slide will give you an idea of how big the Saturn V is. The Saturn V is about 363 feet tall. So tingnan nyo, mas malaki pa ang Saturn V sa Statue of Liberty. Diba? Wow! Grabe! And mas malaki pa ang Saturn V sa Big Ben, sa London. Biruin niyo yan. Ang laki-laking rocket. And until now, the Saturn V is the most powerful rocket ever built by man. And wala pang nakaka-surpass ng Saturn V. Ganyan. Ka-immense ang Saturn V rocket. Okay, next slide. Okay, so those are the sections. First stage, second stage, third stage, and the Apollo spacecraft. Okay, multi-staging was crucial. This is to assure that the spacecraft can escape the Earth's gravitational pull. It follows the principle, second law of motion by Newton. Kasi pag multi-staging kasi, pabawas ang pabawas yung sections ng rocket. So the rocket gets lighter, less massive. So the more it can accelerate, di ba, in Newton's second law of motion, the lesser the mass, the greater is the acceleration, di ba? Okay, so next slide please. Okay, so this is the Apollo spacecraft. The Apollo spacecraft is composed of the lunar module. Yan, so ito yung parang gagamba na maglalanding sa buwan. Then we have the service module, nandun yung mga supplies ng astronauts. And the command module, nandun yung mga astronauts themselves. And we have the launch escape system para kunyari, if anything goes wrong, the command module can easily separate from the rest of the Saturn V. Okay, next slide, please. My dear netizens, if you have any questions, feel free to message. Yan, very interesting itong mga talks namin, yung kay Doods kanina and itong talk about the Apollo. Okay. So the next slide, the command module can accommodate 3 astronauts. Yan, yung lunar module or LM can accommodate 2 astronauts. So ito yung maglalanding sa buwan. Okay, next slide. Okay, next, the mission plan. Okay, the mission plan. Okay, so next slide. Okay, there were 2 proposals in going to the moon. First, we have what we call the Dirac Ascent flight plan. Ito yung ginawa ni Wernher von Braun. Ito yung kanyang proposal. Okay, to build one massive rocket in Saturn V. Okay, capable of leaving the Earth and landing all the crew members on the moon. So yung buong Saturn V mismo yung pupunta sa buwan at yun ang maglalanding. No need for docking procedures. Okay, kaya lang ang problema dito yung bigat ng rocket ng Saturn V. Diba? So, can you imagine the amount of fuel na kailangan para lang lumipad yung isang rocket na yan, pupunta sa buwan, diba? Tapos babalik sa Earth. Diba? So, yun yung tawag natin na direct ascent. Okay, this plan also meant that the astronauts would be stranded on the moon if a serious malfunction would occur after landing. Kasi yung buong rocket mismo yung pumunta sa buwan eh. Okay, that's the direct ascent. This was proposed by Wernher von Braun. Okay, kaya lang merong isa. There was one rocket scientist that made another proposal. Okay, next slide. Okay, his name is John Hubble. Okay, yan, nag-uusap sila in this picture. Nag-uusap sila ni Wernher von Braun. Okay, sabi ni Wernher von Braun, direct ascent will get us to the moon, Mr. Hubble. Sabi naman ni John Hubble, with all due respect, Mr. von Braun, lunar orbit rendezvous is the only way we can reach the moon. So that was his proposal. His proposal was called the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous. Okay, next slide. Yan, or LOR, the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous. Okay, according to the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, okay, next slide. So the plan was to build a 2-part spacecraft. Yan. So the lunar module would separate from the command module in lunar orbit. Okay, and then rendezvous with the command module ulit. Ayun. So dalawang yan, yung service command module will remain in orbit. Then yung lunar module will land on the moon. Okay? Then rendezvous again with the command module. Galing. Galing ng plano. Okay? Advantage, less weight. 1 astronaut will remain in lunar orbit at all times. Para pag may nangyari, there can be a rescue. Pwede silang makagawa ng paraan para hindi ma-stranded yung mga astronaut sa buwan. Disadvantage, yan, yung loss of communication, and docking and undocking procedures will be needed. So, wala pang alam ng yung mga Amerikano about docking and undocking procedures. So, kailangan nilang practicing yan. Okay? And according to John Hubble, that was the only way that they can reach the moon. And natauhan din si Wernher von Braun eventually. He gave up his direct ascent and he supported the lunar orbit rendezvous. Okay, so let me give you an idea of the lunar orbit rendezvous. Next slide. Okay, so the Saturn V would burn for about 11 minutes after launch and achieving a 100 nautical mile circular parking orbit. So mag-orbit muna sila sa Earth. Okay, next slide. Then, ayan. So ito yung separation ng mga stages in the Saturn V. Next slide. Okay, then once in Earth orbit, they will conduct what we call a translunar injection. And after 1 or 2 orbits to verify the readiness of the spacecraft, the third stage of the Saturn V would reignite for about 6 minutes to send the spacecraft to the moon. Yan, ito tinatawag na translunar injection. Alright, next slide. Okay, so during their trip to the moon, there will be what we call a transposition and docking. So they will have to retrieve the lunar module. So the lunar module adapter would separate and exposing the lunar module. The command module moves to the lunar module. Yan. And it will turn about 180 degrees and iikot, as you could see in the picture. Iikot yung command service module. And next slide. Yan. So, the command service module will make a turn around towards the lunar module. Next slide. Okay. And the command service module docks with the lunar module and pulls the combined spacecraft away from the third stage of the Saturn V. Yun. Yun yung plano. Okay, next slide. Ayan. So, next slide. Yan. The command service module pulls the lunar module away from the Saturn V third stage. Okay, next. Next slide. Okay, then once they have reached the moon, they will conduct what we call a lunar orbit insertion. Okay, the spacecraft passes about 60 nautical miles behind the moon, and the service module engines is fired to slow down the spacecraft and pull it into a 60 by 170 nautical mile orbit around the moon. Ayan. So, mag-orbit muna sila sa buwan. That's what they call a lunar orbit insertion. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Then, eto na. The commander, the command module commander and the lunar module pilot, ayan, will move to the lunar module. Yan, magta-transfer na yung dalawa. So, dalawang astronauts ang magta-transfer from the command module to the lunar module. Ayan. Okay, next slide. Okay, then, hihiwalay na yung lunar module. Ayan, the command service module and the lunar module will separate. Okay, and will fire the descent engine for a descent orbit insertion. Yan, ito yung tinatawag natin na power descent. Magla-landing na sila sa buwan, my dear netizens. Okay, next slide. Ayan, you can see in this picture yan, you can see the separation of the command module with the lunar module, yan. And the lunar module is now in a powered descent. Magla-landing na siya sa buwan. Okay, next slide. Okay. Yan. Then, the descent engines fires again to start the descent. And the commander takes over manual control and for a vertical landing to the moon. Yan, ang galing, di ba? Yan, yung tinatawag natin na power descent. Magla-landing na sila sa buwan by igniting the descent engines. Alright, next slide, please. Ayan, you can see this animation. That's power descent, making a soft landing on the moon. Yan, ito yung lunar module, yung parang gagamba, may legs. And the descent engines are fired so that the lunar module can make a soft landing on the moon. Alright, next slide, please. Okay, then, once they have landed, ilalabas na yung mga astronauts. They will perform an EVA. What is EVA? extravehicular activity. Ibig sabihin nun, lalabas sila sa spacecraft and will explore the lunar surface and will collect some samples. Mangongolekta sila ng bato, ng buhangin sa buwan. Okay, next slide please. Okay. Then, pag tapos na yung kanilang mission, nakakolekta na sila ng mga bato, ng mga buhangin, and after they perform experiments, then babalik sila sa spacecraft, then the Ascent engines fires and lifts off, and using the descent stage as the launching pad. Yan. Pabalik na sila sa command module. Okay, next slide. Okay, you can see in this picture, yan. So the Ascent stage engines are fired and the Ascent stage is lifted up. Papunta na yan sa command module. Okay, next slide. Alright, then the Ascent stage rendezvous and docks with the command service module. Ayun, magda-docking ulit sila. Okay, next slide. And you can see in this animation yan. So the lunar module docks with the command service module. Fantastico. Galing, no? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, then, ayan, wala na, hindi na kailangan yung lunar module. So, once the astronauts have transferred from the lunar module to the command module, then the lunar module ascent stage is jettison. Pag sinabing jettison, meaning hiwalay. And eventually fall out of orbit and crash on the lunar surface. Kasi hindi na nila kailangan yun eh. Okay? Alright, so next slide please. Okay, then the astronauts will conduct what they call a trans-Earth injection. Okay, so the service module engines fire and then the whole spacecraft is pushed back to Earth. Yan, pabalik na sila sa Earth. Okay, that's what they call it, trans-Earth injection. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, then, pag malapit na sila sa Earth, the service module is jettisoned. Yan, you can see in this picture, humiwala yung service module. Kasi hindi na nila kailangan eh. Wala na, it has done its job. Okay, so ang matitira na lang is the command module. The command module will turn 180 degrees and it will now re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Okay, next slide please. Yan. So, papasok na yung command module sa Earth's atmosphere. Then the parachutes are deployed, slowing the command module for a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. The astronauts are recovered and brought to an aircraft carrier. Okay? So, my dear netizens, biruin nyo yun. Ang laki-laking Saturn V, doon tayo nag-umpisa sa malaking Saturn V. Mas malaki pa sa Statue of Liberty. Pero ang bumalik, isang kapiranggot lang na command module. Di ba? So, ang gastos. Can you imagine the financial aspect of just one mission to the moon? See? Ang laki-laki ng rocket pero ang babalik, yun lang, yung maliit na yun. Diba? Okay, next slide please. Okay, yan, you can see in this animation, the command module makes a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Ang mga Russians, hindi sila mahilig sa splashdown. Ang ginagawa nila, yung mga spacecraft nila, naglalanding sa lupa. Usually sa desert, yan. Pero itong mga Amerikano, mahilig sila sa splashdown. Sila sa dagat, sa Pacific Ocean. Alright, next slide. Okay, so that's the plan, my dear netizens, on how to go to the moon. So, in order to succeed in putting men on the moon, itong kailangan ng mga astronauts. Okay, practice docking and rendezvous maneuvers, practice EVA, yung extravehicular activity, yung kailangan nila mag-practice, yung docking, kasi hindi nila alam eh, they don't know how to do the maneuver. So, dapat kailangan nila mag-practice, practicing EVA, and practice prolonged stay in space. I think Doods was able to mention the distance of the moon from the Earth. Malayo kaya ang buwan. Okay, and it took 4 days, 4 days for the Apollo spacecraft just to reach the moon. Tapos 4 days pabalik. So 1 week ang astronauts sa space. So they have to practice prolonged stay in space. Yan ang kailangan ng mga astronauts in order to succeed in putting men on the moon. And this led to the next manned space program by NASA. Hindi pa Apollo. It's called Project Gemini. Okay, Project Gemini. Next slide, please. Okay. All right, that's Project Gemini by NASA. Next slide. Okay, so Project Gemini was the intermediate step between Mercury and Apollo. So they need to develop the technology for a lunar landing. So kailangan nila mag-practice ng docking and may mga maneuvers sa space. They have to practice prolonged stay in space. Yan, that was the main goal of Project Gemini. Okay, next slide. And kaya tinawag ng Gemini kasi dalawang astronauts yung sa spacecraft. So dalawang astronauts ang pwedeng i-accommodate. Kaya Gemini, di ba? Gemini the twins. Unlike Mercury, di ba sa Project Mercury, isang astronaut lang. Ito Project Gemini, dalawa. Okay, next slide. And the Gemini spacecraft was carried by a Titan rocket. Ito yung Titan rocket. The Titan rocket is also an intercontinental ballistic missile. ICBM yan. So they were now using weapons of mass destruction in space exploration. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, Gemini's mission objectives and to test the astronauts' flying ability for long-duration missions, to practice docking and rendezvous maneuvers in space, re-entry landing procedures, and long space flights on astronauts. Okay, next slide. Okay, so there were several Gemini missions, like we have here Gemini 3. Okay, Gemini 3 was the first crewed mission in the Gemini program. Next slide. Okay, then we have Gemini 4. Now, Gemini 4 launched astronauts Ed White and James McDivitt into space. Ed White became the first American to conduct a spacewalk. As you could see in the picture. So Ed White became the first American to do a spacewalk. Gemini 4. Next slide. Okay. Yeah, so that's Edward White, June 3, 1965. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we have Gemini 5. Okay, Gemini 5 carried Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad. Okay, its mission to last 8 days. Yeah, 8 days in space. That's Gemini 5. Okay, next slide. Ayan, so Gemini 5 breaks the space flight duration record. Yeah, kasi kailangan ng mga astronauts yan before they can land on the moon. Dapat makatagal sila sa outer space. Next slide. Okay, then we have Gemini 6. Gemini 6 achieved the first manned rendezvous with another spacecraft. Yan, magdadock siya sa isang spacecraft. Its sister Gemini 7. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is Gemini 7 and Gemini 6 making a rendezvous. Yan with Walter Schirra and Thomas Stafford. Okay, then on Gemini 6 we have Gemini 7 we have Frank Borman and James Lovell. Okay, and Gemini 7. Okay, next slide, please. Ayan, rendezvous with these two spacecraft, Gemini 6 and 7. Okay, next slide. Ayan, di ba ang galing? Fantastic, galing, no? Sila, magdidikit sila. Okay, parang bolt test 5, bolt in. Okay, next slide, please. Ayan. Okay, next slide again. Okay, then Gemini 7. I think I mentioned already Gemini 7 already. Next slide. Okay, this is Gemini 7, December 4, 1965. First orbital rendezvous mission of Gemini 7. Next slide. Okay, so we have here James Lovell on the left and Frank Borman on the right. Yan. So Gemini 7 yan. Okay, ang mga test pilots yung mga yan. Okay, next slide. Okay, all right. I think I already mentioned Gemini 7. So next slide, please. Okay, that's Gemini 7. Next slide. Okay, then we have Gemini 8. All right, Gemini 8 featured Neil Armstrong. Yan. Neil Armstrong was on board Gemini 8 and Dave Scott. They made the first space dock. And ano to, may story ito eh. Nagkaroon ng malfunction. Okay, system failure. Then umikot yung spacecraft in Gemini 8. They went into a roll. Umikot. Okay, pero ano, matindi ang reflexes ni Neil Armstrong. He was able to control the malfunction, yung rolling ng Gemini 8. Kaya siguro siya pinili sa Apollo 7. Kasi ano yan eh, may presence of mind si Neil Armstrong. He was able to avert the malfunction in Gemini 8. Okay, next slide. All right, so that's on the left, you have Dave Scott, and on the right, we have Neil Armstrong. Yung hawak-hawak niya yung Gemini 8 spacecraft. Yun, yung model. Okay, next slide. Okay, then that's the Agena rocket. Yan, doon sila nagpa-practice mag-dock. Yan, that's Agena rocket. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, then we have Gemini 10. Okay, so Young and Michael Collins, John Young and Michael Collins. So you know Michael Collins, diba? Michael Collins was one of the Apollo 11 astronauts together with Neil Armstrong. Yan, di ba? Okay, so that's Gemini 10. Okay, next slide. All right, Gemini 10 completed rendezvous with 2 separate targets. Michael Collins became the first person to visit another spacecraft in orbit. Fantastico! Di ba? Galing. Galing talaga ni Michael Collins. Okay, and they were all designed as stepping stones in the preparation for the Apollo moon landings to follow. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's Gemini 10, yung target docking vehicle, the Agena. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we have the Gemini 11. Okay, notable for achieving the highest altitude in orbit ever recorded. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's Gemini 11. Mataas yung orbit niya. Okay, next slide. Okay, and we have the last of the Gemini missions, Gemini 12. Gemini 12 was the final flight of the Gemini series. And it carried astronauts Jim Lovell, yan, di ba kanina? Si Jim Lovell sa Gemini 7. And Edwin Buzz Aldrin, yan. Buzz Aldrin is one of the astronauts of Apollo 11. Okay. All right, so that's the Gemini program of NASA. Okay, next slide. So in this picture, we have Buzz Aldrin doing an EVA. Lumabas siya dun sa spacecraft. Yan. Okay, next slide. Okay, then the last would be the Apollo program of NASA. Ito na yung pupunta na sila sa buwan. Nakapag-practice na sila. And they were able to develop the technologies needed for a manned landing on the moon. So that's now Project Apollo. Okay, next slide. So the purpose of the Apollo program was to land men on the lunar surface. Yan, eto na. Ito na yung sinasabi ni John F. Kennedy to land men on the moon and return them safely to the Earth. So that's the objective of Project Apollo, using the mighty Saturn V that was developed by Wernher von Braun. Okay, next slide. Okay, so first we have Apollo 1. Okay, next. So Apollo 1, we have the astronauts Ed White, 'di ba? Kilala niyo si Ed White, yung the first American to conduct a spacewalk. Then we have Gus Grissom sa Mercury program, and may bagitong astronaut si Roger Chaffee. Okay, Apollo 1. Kaya lang sa kasawiang palad, all the 3 astronauts were killed in a fire in the command module. Namatay sila, may sunog dun sa command module. Next slide. Yan. So, ito yan, yung tatlo. Si Grissom, to the left, we have Grissom. Sa gitna, we have Ed White. Then si Roger Chaffee on the right. Okay, next slide. Yan, ito yung command module na sunog. Alam niyo kung bakit nasunog yan? First, yung atmosphere sa loob ng command module, ito is pure oxygen. 'Di ba? In science, we know that pure oxygen facilitates combustion. And ang malas pa, mataas yung pressure, yung air pressure sa loob. So the high pressure and the pure oxygen would trigger fire. Nagkaroon ng electrical spark sa loob. Yun. Doon sila nadali, nasunog. Okay, next slide. Ayan, you can see the remains of the command module. Okay, next slide. Ayan, ito, kawawa, nasunog. Ito yung mga sunog na bodies ng tatlo. See? Grabe. Wala makakaligtas dyan. Patay sila. Unang-unang Apollo mission. See? Ganun talaga. You can't win them all. Di ba? Sa Russia, ganun din. May mga namatay din kaya na astronauts, mga cosmonauts. Rather. Sa Soviet Union. Okay, next slide. Ayan. Ito yung mga charred remains ng tatlo. Yan yung kay Gus Grissom, yung kay Ed White, yung kay Roger Chaffee. Alright, next slide please. Ayan, and it became headlines sa US. Astronauts die in a fiery capsule. Ayan, malaking blow to sa NASA and the space program. Okay, next slide. Okay, and because of that, there was no Apollo 2 and 3. Ayan, para they have to figure bakit ano ba nangyari sa Apollo 1, bakit nagkaroon ng sunog, ganyan. So, they have to figure out kung ano naging problema. So, there was no Apollo 2 and 3. Instead, there were unmanned launches, Apollo Saturn 202 and Apollo Saturn 203, using the Saturn 1B, hindi pati yung Saturn 5. Okay, next slide, please. So, this is the Saturn 1B. Ito, maliit lang na version to ng Saturn 5. So, ginamit na to to make further evaluations and testings. Para malaman nila kung ayaw na nilang maulit doon sa nangyari sa Apollo 1. Apollo 1 gave valuable lessons about some flaws in the Saturn 5. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we have Apollo 4. Yan, Apollo 4 was the first unmanned test flight of the Saturn V. Wala pang astronaut sa loob, unmanned pa lang yan. Tinetesting nila yung capability ng Saturn V. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we have Apollo 5. Apollo 5 was the first unmanned flight of the Apollo lunar module. So, tinetesting ngayon nila yung Apollo, yung lunar module, yung maglalanding sa buwan. Okay, next slide please. That's Apollo 5. Okay, then we have Apollo 6. Apollo 6 was the second all-up unmanned test of the Saturn V. So, sigurista na yung mga Amerikano. Ayaw na nilang maulit yung nangyari sa Apollo 1. So, they made further tests of the Saturn V rocket through Apollo 6. Okay, next slide. Ayan. So, ito yung pag-separate ng mga stages of the Saturn V. Alright, next slide, please. Okay, then we have Apollo 7. Okay, Apollo 7, next slide. So, this was the full unmanned space test flight. So, may tao na sa loob ng ng Apollo spacecraft. That was Apollo 7. Okay, manned test of the main Apollo spacecraft and its equipment on board. May tao na sa loob ng Apollo 7. Okay, next slide. Okay, yeah, that's Apollo 7. Okay, kaya lang may nangyari sa Apollo 7 eh. Okay, ito yung unang-unang space mutiny. Nagkaroon ng mutiny sa space kasi itong tatlong astronauts na ito, may sipon, masakit yung ulo, may nasal congestion, may runny nose, ganyan, di ba? Pero ngayon, pag may runny nose ka na, saka may lagnat, di ba? Ibang ibig sabihin na yun. So anyway, itong mga astronauts na ito, may sipon. So they cannot perform at their best. Kinukulit sila ng mission control. So, they got a little snappy with mission control. Siguro pinagsabihan sila, ba't ang kulit ninyo? Huwag niyo kaming kulitin, masama na yung pakiramdam namin. Yan, so that was the first space mutiny in space. And as a result, NASA did not invite any of the men back for future space flight. Yun. Okay, that's Apollo 7. Okay, next. Next slide. Oh, yan. So that's this is Apollo 7 making a splashdown in the Pacific. Atlantic Ocean naman to. They landed in the Atlantic Ocean. Upside down. Oh, parang napakamalas ng Apollo 7. May sipon na yung mga astronauts. Pagbalik nila sa Earth, upside down yung capsule nila. Okay, next slide. Then we have Apollo 8. Okay, crucial tong Apollo 8. Okay, next slide. Okay, so Apollo 8 became the first crewed spacecraft to leave Earth orbit and to reach the moon. So, technically, parang na-achieve na ng US yung goal ni John F. Kennedy to put a man on the moon. Yan, nakarating na yung Apollo 8 sa buwan and return them safely to the Earth. They were able to do that. So technically, narating na nila ang buwan. And they were able to beat the Russians. Yeah, to Apollo 8. Okay, next slide. So this was the flight plan of Apollo 8. Next slide. Yan. Can you see this? So this is the famous video that they took. Ito yung tinatawag na Earthrise. Yan, Earth, kasi nasa buwan sila eh. So, the Earth is rising in the above the horizon. Yan, Earthrise. Yan, so, this is one evidence that the Earth is round. Kayo yung mga flat earthers dyan, yan, magsitigil na kayo. Ito na yung ebidensya na ang mundo natin ay bilog. Okay? Next slide, please. Okay, yan. This was the famous photo of Earthrise by Apollo 8. Next slide, please. Okay, then we have Apollo 9. Okay, Apollo 9, McDivitt, Scott, and Schweikart on board Apollo 9. Okay, next slide. So, the main objective of Apollo 9 is to test the lunar module in low Earth orbit. Yan, okay, that's Apollo 9. Okay, next. Next slide. Ayan, ito yung they were now testing the lunar module. Ayan, in low Earth orbit. Next slide, please. Okay. Then we have Apollo 10. Ayan, Stafford, Young, and Cernan. Okay, next slide. So these were the astronauts of Apollo 10. Eugene Cernan, John Young, and Thomas Stafford. Okay, next slide. Okay, main objective of Apollo 10 was a dress rehearsal. Yan. So, nagpa-practice na sila. Okay, test all the procedures and the equipment needed to land on the moon. So, that was the objective of Apollo 10. And next slide. Yan. Okay, Apollo 10. So, inside Apollo 10, may lumutang na tae. So, during the mission, may lumutang na pieces of fecal matter around the command module. So, hindi natin alam kung kanino yung fecal matter na yan. Pero lumulutang dun sa loob ng command module of Apollo 10. Okay, next slide. Okay, then we have the famous Apollo 11 landing with the Eagle. So next slide, we have the Apollo 11 crew, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Okay, my dear netizens, kaya natin ginawa itong space talk na ito, it's because we are commemorating the 51st anniversary of the Apollo landing. Apollo 11 was launched in July 16. O, di ba? July 16, kailan? Yung isang araw lang yan. 1969. They reached the moon, I think, July 20. O, mga 4 na araw ang lakbay nila. 1969. So, my dear netizens, we are commemorating the 51st anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing on the moon. Next slide. Ayan, ito yung famous photo ops nilang tatlo. Okay? Ayan. So, baka may magtanong, baka yung Apollo 11 landing peke. Hindi yan peke, my dear netizens. They have really landed on the moon. Next slide. So, on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched. Okay, with a mighty Saturn V rocket. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and on July 20, yeah, they reached the moon on July 20. All right, 1969. And Neil Armstrong uttered the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Fantastico. Galing. Next slide, please. Ayan, so that's etong bumababa sa lunar module, that's Buzz Aldrin. Kasi si Neil Armstrong nauna na eh. So it was Neil Armstrong who was taking this picture of Buzz Aldrin walking down on the command lunar module. Okay, next slide. Ayan, and they were able to plant the American flag for the first time. Yeah. So they were able to beat the Russians. Yay! That's it. Natalo na nila ang mga Russians. Okay? And they were able to achieve the goal of John F. Kennedy. Okay? They were able to reach the moon before the end of the decade. Diba? Okay, next slide. Ayan. So this is the famous photo of Neil Armstrong. Next slide. Okay. And they were able to perform several experiments on the moon. Okay, so I guess I will stop here. So, ito yung history ng lunar landing. There were other missions, Apollo 12, Apollo 13, pero Apollo 13, they failed to land on the moon kasi nagkaroon nga ng accident. Diba? There was an accident in outer space, so they failed to make a lunar landing. But they were able to return safely back to Earth. Then we have Apollo 14, we have Apollo 15 with the first lunar rover, 16, and the last Apollo mission was Apollo 17. Okay, so I guess that's it for my, I hope hindi masyadong mahaba yung talk kasi history. Alright, but anyway, that's our fascination of our moon, my dear netizens, like what Doods had mentioned. So we were so fascinated about the moon, kaya we dreamt, nangarap tayo of going to the moon. Yan. Okay. So thank you very much, and I guess we are now ready for our question and answer. So
Yes,
if
po.
you have any questions, my dear netizens, feel free to write down your questions about yung talk ni Doods kanina and my talk about the history of Apollo.
Probably,
Okay.
sir, even if after the live stream ends, I think, sir, can they send questions pa rin?
Yeah, oo.
Oh, yes.
Pwede, oo, pwede.
If you're watching this in the future and you are watching this thing, you can drop questions here. Which reminds me, sir,
Mm.
I don't know
We
if
will
I...
have a replay. We will have a replay of this.
Ayun niya, sir.
So, may mga tanong ba? May mga
Yep.
tanong ba about Mr. GC, our host? Baka may mga tanong dyan about the talks.
Yes, sir. Sige, sir, I'll let them think the questions first. But initial question muna, parang icebreaker. Okay, Sir Doods, how were you able to start BSYA Alabang?
On that, it's really more on yung inspiration ko with from Sir June. He really inspired me to actually strive for what he had in his club, yung BSYA, which was really to reach out to students about astronomy, because I have rarely seen, not that I haven't learned about astronomy nung nasa high school, but more on nakita ko na pwede siyang magawa as a standalone subject, and to share that, and most importantly, having that to be accessible to the public and accessible to every single person na makaka-reach out. I think that inspired me that it could be done in Manila. It could also be done in another school. So yeah, yun ang inspiration. Establish ng BSYA branch dun sa...
Sir, are you proud na... Sir June, thank you for Sir Doods. Sir June.
Sige.
Sir June.
Sir?
Oh, yes,
There you go.
copy.
Ayun. Sir, knowing
Yeah,
na
I
Sir
am
Doods
really...
was your former student,
Yeah, I'm really proud of
how can you
Dudes
like...
coming up with a BSYA Alabang, kasi with BSYA Alabang, he can reach out to his students, and Mr. Dudes can share his passion of astronomy. Actually, hindi lang astronomy, kasi Dudes is parang siyang jack of all trades eh. Hindi lang pang astronomy yan. Magtanong ka kahit ano about science, he can answer it. He is a jack of all trades. He can share his passion for science with his students.
Speaking of something like sharing,
Using BSYA Alabang. Yeah.
speaking like of sharing po, if I may share po while we wait for the questions, Sir June
sige.
did mention the intricacies of having to land yung Saturn V rocket on the moon, then get the module, yung command module from the moon back to orbiting spacecraft, then go back to Earth. So I'm pretty sure I'm allowed to do this, but if I may share, there is an app. If you have Google Play right now, to our viewers right now, place, there is an app that it's a game, by the way, and it's a wonderful game. I have played this about a couple hours kasi ang saya niya talaga lang eh. It's called Space Agency. So you can go to Google Play Store, you can play. I think I can find it. Basically, it has different types of simulations of different spacecrafts. So I have here ready. You can see. I have Saturn V rocket, and you can construct a lot of different rockets here, from the Soyuz rocket. I think you can also construct the Saturn 1P. Pinaka main principle dito is that you can simulate different, not simulate to the point of physics, pero as a good way to introduce children how spacecraft technology works. Like, I'm not gonna play the game exactly, but I'm gonna play the demo. So you can have a demo here. You can see how the rocket launches, how it tilts, and as you can see, I think I'm allowed to show this one, di ba? So, ayan, so you can see the rocket would launch. By the way, this is a game that I think even kids could play. Masaya ka laruin. So, yeah, you can see that the launch of the rocket, but slowly but surely makikita somewhere over here. Yan, if you will gauge here. Then slowly but surely makikita mo this rocket, and eventually makakaalis kayo ng Earth. Then ang ultimate mission nito is to the moon. So, I won't give much into detail, but I'll just show you the first stage, yung release ng stage. Just to show you na it is a visual guide for those who are not that familiar with space tech, yung space flight tech. As you can see, na-disconnect, then mawawala yung pairing, tapos, yun na. Now we're at the second stage. So again, it simulates pretty much a good way, and it does include and you see the sticker in the game. Again, if you want to see it, actually, I really suggest you try to download this game. Yung saya niya, there are different missions. I think, hindi niya ata ngayon, it has yung SpaceX boosters. People have sa Earth. I think the SpaceX boosters give Earth that was the reason just share to the viewers. Just gives you a visual again. So visualization of pag nag-launch ka it's something lang to make those viewers na if these things work. However, it's a good beginning for you to just share now.
Ganda naman yun, sir.
Yeah, oo nga. Di ba nabanggit mo na sa akin yan yung game na yan. Meron ka pang nabanggit Doods yung Kerbal Space
Program, sir.
Ano ba yun? Kerbal Space.
Program.
Yun, di ba?
I have yun ata I
meron
think
din
concrete math. May concrete math yun, and I haven't actual orbit kasi medyo nahirapan ako. That one is very accurate. Pwede siyang gamitin to teach students how do spacecraft adjust yung weight nila and yung levels of power na kayang ibigay ng kanilang mga rockets every single time they transition from one stage to another. Kasi it gives a good detailed assessment kung yung paglipat ng center of mass, yung paglipat ng pag-tilt, yung the act of tilting, pinapakita doon kung bakit importante na nag-tilt ang spacecraft every time it launches. Again, if you're into those advanced stuff, it's a good game to play. Kerbal Space Program.
Okay, so my dear netizens, you heard the man, Doods Perea. So if you can download those games, maganda yan. It would be a very good educational game. Yan, yung Kerbal Space Program, saka yung binanggit niya kanina, I forgot what it is. Ano nga yun? Doods ulit yan?
Space Agency. Free on
Yes, Space
Google.
Agency. Yan, Space Agency. You visit Google Play. And can you download those games? Diba? Mas okay yun. Educational pa. Diba? You can learn more of space and space travel. Yan, ayan. So, thank you good Doods for sharing. Yun, buti nabanggit mo yun. Magandang yan sa mga netizens natin na nakikinig.
I really promise
Okay.
ang ganda niyang experience.
Okay,
I would like
Mr. G,
to just add
anything
to the
else?
audience. I'll just add, sir, na our audience can ask their questions down below. So, if you want to ask us anything about the spacecrafts or more of the moon, history of Apollo, the successful Apollo 11 mission, you can actually ask them down below. We'll be answering your questions. And in the meantime, while we wait for that, Sir June, why was the race to the moon so significant, sir? Why is it so significant?
Significant what? Can you repeat the question? Significant.
What is the significance between
What is the significance
Russia
of
and
the
US?
moon race?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it all started with the arms race. Diba? We know that in history, after the development of the atomic bomb by the Americans, then the Russians also retaliated with developing their own nuclear weapons. Okay, then inisip nila na siguro we can we can launch these nuclear weapons in outer space. So yun yung beginning ng space race. So by launching Sputnik 1. Sputnik 1 in October 4, di ba? Then yan, nangunguna na yung Russians. Okay, but anyway, Dudes, you can add to this, ano yung significance ng space race?
Probably the only thing I can add po is that you see the jump in technologies. Like, look back 100 years, maybe less than that, maybe 50 years, the time na nangyari yung space race. The only imaginable thing that you could see in the sky map was a plane. And to be honest, hindi pa perfect ang plane tech doon. I mean, honestly, the commercial flight lang, the local flights around the Earth, it's pretty hard. Then you get to see these gigantic machines that can actually send a small payload above orbit and make sure na nandun siya for a long period of time. Like, one good significance of the space race is how we can develop technologies. And develop these things. By the way, this was shared by a lot of people, but I can see that now, even before space as space technology, even the space race itself, even if the space race is accomplished or won by another country, still won't lower the prices of bread. However, now that we see that we have the technological capability to jump a plane to something to an ICBM to a rocket in the speed of a very short time, maintaining and humans can do it, and then we use it to make something. We can use it for communicating satellites, achieve space. Manila that we can do it consistently and better technology. So the space race has its significance to be revealed that humanity can make stuff like this. One takeaway also is that it would be better if they operated. It would have been totally better if the USA and the Soviet Russia was able to cooperate and actually operated with each other in order to go to the moon. It would have saved them. I would bet on a lot of dollars, a lot of whatever currency, I would think. But despite the rivalry that was the space race, it really just showed it's like if we set up our differences, if we best and brightest or constant to this, we can do it. Hindi siya something of history lang. Maririnig lang yan. It's a real adventure.
Okay. Well said, Mr. Perea. The development of new technology. So this space race led to new technologies, and eventually these technologies enables us to land on the moon and to explore space. Diba? I think yung latest ngayon is yung Mars Perseverance rover, diba?
Yung drill,
So
sir?
ito yung mga technologies na may helicopter.
Ayun,
Yung Perseverance rover, may helicopter sa Mars. That's the first helicopter sa Mars. Biruin niyo yun. Ayan, so Mr. Gabuya, if you're listening, yan, nabanggit ko yung Perseverance rover. So anyway, siguro we will have another discussion about the secrets of Mars. Yan.
Hopefully.
Okay, so thank you, dude, for that answer.
Last thing na lang, sir, also, parang aware din yung audience. Also, the space race had a significant contribution also to our daily lives kasi hindi natin nare-realize you would not be able to watch this tape, you would not be able to post on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, you would not be able to contact your loved ones from afar if the space tech that we had back then was not developed. The space tech that was developed during the space race was probably an important part, an imperative point in how we got the stuff that we have today. So again, if you want to thank somebody for the Wi-Fi you have, for the good cellular connection you have, for the stream that you're probably watching, you can thank the space race for it.
Definitely, sir.
Yeah. So, we call that the spin-offs. Yan.
Ayun.
Spin-offs ng space race, di ba? Yan, yung marami like yung fire resistant suits, yan yung dialysis machine, etong internet na ito. Yan, mga spin-offs ng space program. So, yan ang benefits ng space race. Well said, dudes. Galing. See, my dear netizens, sabi ko sa inyo, mas magaling pa yan sa akin eh. Oh, yan. Okay. Sige. Mr. GC, baka may tanong pa dyan.
Lagi so wala pa naman. So like, ito.
Okay.
So, moving, let's have like a short teaser na lang for the next. So you mentioned the Perseverance rover sa Mars. So what is the Perseverance rover's like job? Or ano yung purpose na sa Mars?
Ang Perseverance rover, parang ito yung parang sagot dun sa Curiosity. So if you're familiar with the Curiosity rover, malaki siya, parang kasi laki ng Volkswagen. Ang Perseverance rover halos ganun din. Kaya lang, ang kinaganda nito, I think it will drill, mag-aano siya eh. Maghahanap siya ng probably water, sources of water. And meron siyang helicopter. Meron siyang helicopter yung Perseverance rover. Parang drone, pero parang helicopter siya. Okay? Kasi dudes, baka meron siyang may-add doon. If he's familiar with the Perseverance rover.
Perseverance rover was yung drill, like the drill itself. Kasi thinking about drilling a planet, it's really an idea. Probably is an idea na nakuha ng mga astronomers way before the space race began. Like, it is a dream now realized. Like, imagine trying to drill on what's underneath Mars. And hopefully, I think they are also trying to find if the recipes of, well, quote-unquote life could be found there, like certain nitrogen-rich soil, and they're trying to find among other stuff. But I think I dig very deep. I cannot recall how deep though. How deep ba sila ang plan nila? Ang recall ko lang kasi sir,
so
how deep?
Ayan, so magdi-drill sila eh. Ayan, so thank you dudes for that answer. And siguro for our last segment before we end this live stream, please check out, my dear netizens, yung Neowise comet. So by next week, it would be very visible in the night sky. So please watch out for the Neowise comet. And also, there's an upcoming activity of the Manila Street Astronomers. There will be a talk that will be given by the founder, no less than Sir Gary Andreasen. Please watch out for that. It will be on Monday. This Monday, July, what is this, 20, I think. So at this Monday, please check out their Facebook page, the Manila Street Astronomers, for more details about that talk of the founder, Sir Gary Andreasen. Okay?
I will be
so
posting
I guess
there we go. It's posted. So if you're interested, yung sinabi ko ni Sir June, it's already in the chat. Take a look at it.
Yeah, thank you, dudes.
Sige
Okay, so my dear netizens, so thank you very much for staying with us for the last 3 hours. Sana marami po kayong natutunan about the moon, about Project Apollo. Again, we are commemorating the 51st anniversary of Apollo 11, kaya natin ginawa ito. So check out for our future live stream events. So Sir Doods, maraming salamat for joining us in this live stream event.
Thank you din po.
So marami
Thank
kang
you,
na-reach
sir.
out ngayon ng mga estudyante.
I do
So
hope
we
so.
will have a replay of this. So kung may mga tanong pa kayo, if you have any questions na hindi nyo na dito, you can just type in your questions and we will answer them. Okay? So, Mr. GC would like to say some
Yes, sir.
parting words.
I would like to take this time to thank everyone that tuned in for this live stream. So if you want to watch more live streams like this, like we talk about moon or anything about the heavenly bodies above, please like our Facebook page at the BEDAN Society of Young Astronomers, and please support our brothers and sisters from San Beda College, Alabang, by liking their page at the BEDAN Society of Young Astronomers, Alabang. So, dudes, we thank you for your guest starring on this, and many more speaks to come, and definitely we'll have more topics like this. And next time we'll have Sir Gobuyo on the show when we talk about the Mars, or like history of the Mars expeditions. So with that,
Okay, so Dudes, thank you. This will not be the last. Yeah, magiging suki ka dito. Yan. Mr. Doods
Of course.
Perea, my dear netizens. He is one of the best science communicators. Yan, magaling na science communicator si Dudes. Okay, so thank you very much, my dear netizens. And live long and prosper. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
yes, sir.
Mr. GC, thank you. Alright,
Hi,
thank you
guys.
for the crew of the BEDAN Society of Young Astronomers. Mr. Kus Pakulanan, our technical guy. Maraming salamat.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kus.
and we will see you.
Thank you, GC.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Clear skies.
Bye.